I looked this up the other day. This is amazing to think about. This would be, if this happens, the first time they've had back-to-back losing seasons in full campaigns since 1958-59. What I reported was that the Phillies and Dodgers were in as late as the final 24 hours, and that the Dodgers were still talking to the White Sox in the final hour. Now, you might say, well, why were they doing that, knowing that he would want an extension to pitch in the postseason? That was very much public. And the reason is his talent. And the teams that were looking at him were looking at him not just for this year, when who knows what they were going to get one way or the other. It's his first year starting. But for 25 and 26, when the fact of the matter is you'd be getting an ace starter at reasonable arbitration salaries, combined probably about $15 million max in those 2 years. And he's a guy who has pitched like an ace this year. So for that reason, those teams stayed in, and you can understand why they stayed in. Now, why did it happen? It didn't happen simply because the White Sox did not get the package that they wanted. And you might say, well, how high were they aiming? My understanding is pretty high, and you can understand why they were aiming pretty high. Here's a guy making $60,000 above the minimum. He's pitching like an ace this year. You got the 2 more years coming, and that's a pretty rare thing in the market. And basically, in the opinion of others in the industry, the White Sox were not out of line to ask for a team's very best prospect. Now, they didn't get it, but maybe in the offseason they'll try again. In fact, I expect they will try again.
Did you get all this information only after the deadline, or were you hearing some things like that, or were you just hearing the teams?
I was hearing some things before the deadline, Eric, but I don't hold back when I get stuff. So I continued pursuing it in the final or in the last week or so. And one reason I continued pursuing it was Jason Stark, who you guys had on yesterday. He heard right after the deadline, this was right after, that there were some big prospect names thrown around, that the White Sox could have made a deal, that this was more serious and close than we thought. And I made a mental note to myself to check back on that when I got back from vacation, and that's what I did.
Ken, question for you, because I think a bunch of us are sitting there scratching our heads at the deadline where the White Sox should have should have had the high asking price for a bunch of their prospects, whether it was Crochet or Luis Robert or anything like that. Why does it feel, I'm going to switch it up just a little bit, why does it feel like they kind of settled on what they took for Fetty and the other deals and why did they come down on that asking price instead of these other ones?
That's a great question, Jason. A lot of people in the game are asking that question, that when you trade Fetty and Tommy Pham, why are you only getting what you got back in return, Miguel Vargas and 2 minor leaguers? That, to me, is still something that we're going to have to judge in the years to come. We'll see how these players perform for the White Sox, whether they do really well or not. But it was, in the estimation of some, a very low return, or a light return, put it that way. And as I always say, these things are hard to judge in the moment because we don't know how these players are going to perform. Maybe that trade looks better over time. Maybe it looks worse. But sure, it was interesting that you had Fetty, who was very much in demand. He hasn't pitched that well for St. Louis, but at the time, he was, one of the top 3 or 4 starters available. Flaherty was ahead of him. Crochet was ahead of him. Snell, if you want to count him, sure. But Fetty was, along with Zach Eflin, in that next group. So they could have maybe done a better deal, but they chose what they chose. And again, over time, we'll see how that plays out.
From the White Sox to the Marlins, Ken, I want to ask you about Sandy Alcantara. Obviously, his name hasn't come up for the most part this year because he's been recovering from Tommy John surgery. We saw the tweet yesterday from Craig Mish saying the team actually informed him that he won't be traded in the offseason. Is that normal? And also, is that like a Steve Nash alley-oop to Amari Stoudemire? Maybe I'm dating myself a little bit because, I don't see trades often with Tommy John guys coming back, even of his ilk. If they stink and it's May, it could be a rise again, no?
Absolutely it could be. And it's awfully charitable of the Marlins to inform Sandy Alcantara that they're not going to trade him. His value is down. Of course they're not going to trade him, but the moment his value starts building back up again after he returns next season, yes, they've got 2 more years at pretty good money. I think it's 16, 17 million a year. Of course they're going to entertain it. So that report, of course, it was a fair report, reasonable to report that. But from the Marlins' perspective, I was thinking, okay, great. You're not going to trade a guy coming off Tommy John. Congratulations.
Are the Marlins getting close? If they do that in May next year, Alcantara comes back and he gets traded, are they at risk of being investigated for the similar thing that like the Pirates were investigated for not competing? Because it is a stark just tear down of everything. If you go and trade that pitcher who could actually help your team in some way, or am I completely off on that?
No, not at all. They were one of the teams named in that Players Association grievance, along with the Pirates, the A's, and the Rays, if I'm not mistaken. Now, that grievance has not gone anywhere. It's several years old now. But you can make the case that, yes, they are not spending to the level that they should be, considering the revenue sharing they're receiving. The other side of that, Eric, is that they've accumulated a lot of talent. And the way the game is, as much as we don't like it, but the way it goes is that basically teams are allowed, I guess is the right word. I don't know. Maybe that's not the right word, but they operate in a way that they can just basically be free in how they go about it. So maybe the Marlins could make the case, yeah, we're doing this, we're tearing down, but look at all the talent we've collected, and now we're going to build back up again. Teams have the right to operate basically however they want. Now, the Players Association can file a grievance when they feel these teams are not spending to the level that they should be, but it's kind of hard to prove that, as we've seen. It hasn't been established yet. When you have a team like them, or like the Orioles a few years ago, kind of just collecting talent and looking for a better day. I don't like what the Marlins did coming off a playoff appearance. I hated it, but this is the route they're choosing, and we'll see where it goes.
All right. Talked about it yesterday with Jason Stark about the double hook and the 6-inning rule. Where do you sit on it in the sense of how close are we to implementing something? And I know I'm really broad stroking because Rob Thompson just said last night after reacting to the article, he said, well, it has to be something that's instituted in the minor leagues before it's instituted in the big leagues. How close are we to moving in that direction?
I don't sense that we're all that close, Eric. And yes, Rob Thompson made a good point that something like that, the 6-inning rule in particular, would have to be phased in over time. You can't just go 0 to 100 with these things. And the double hook, to me, you could implement that tomorrow. And I don't know that it would be a detriment to anyone. I don't know why they wouldn't do that. But as we both know, the sport moves slowly. And for all the talk about these dramatic changes that were in effect last year, implemented last year, it took a long time to get to that point. So I don't expect anything to happen soon. Right now, Major League Baseball is conducting a study on the health of starting pitching and how to keep pitchers healthy in general. I imagine they want that to be kind of completed before they go forward here. But all of these things that have come up, first when Jason and I wrote in May about this, and then, of course, yesterday when Jesse Rogers from ESPN wrote his story, these are ideas that are kind of percolating. And there is seemingly a consensus that the sport does need to revive the starting pitcher. I don't know that anyone would argue that for the sake of entertainment. Now, it might not be the best way to win a game in the present circumstances. You might say, I'd rather have my guy go 4 innings than bring in my parade of 95-mile-an-hour relievers. Okay, that might be the best way to win a game, and that's the way front offices have to operate. It's not necessarily the best product. And as Jason pointed out yesterday, and as we wrote in that story in May, it used to be the question every fan asked before going to a game was, who's pitching tonight? Now that question has been diminished.
Yeah, I'm with you. I hope it gets solved, but we'll have a lot of time in the offseason to hit it too. And he's right. I mean, man, we were talking 10 years ago about the pitch clock, and then it finally came to play, last season. So, all right, let's get back to the field. Yeah,
go
ahead.
You just said it was like so many years ago. You looked at, okay, it's a starting pitcher. Well, so many years ago, there was the game of the week was on. Now we live in a generation of, I want this now for 10 minutes. I want to do that. I want this. So isn't the game kind of shifting with like, hey, I just want the best pitcher. I want to see most velocity, hardest swings. Go get them. In a sense, you saying it there.
Eric, no question, it shifted to that. My question in response would be, is this the best product? Now, for people who like swing and miss and who like seeing guys throwing 95 and blowing out, yeah, it may be the best product. I don't know that ultimately it is the best way to keep your fans engaged to the highest level. Certainly, fans are engaged now. The sport is doing fine. But the starting pitcher and the role of the starting pitcher, the stud guy on the mound, hopefully for 6, 7, 8 innings, that's kind of disappeared. And I do believe something has been lost in this transition to where we are now.
It's disappeared, but hasn't it been like, then doesn't it mean more when you have one of those guys who consistently goes 6, 7, 8 innings instead of like forcing it? That becomes a luxury then. Like, hey, we got guys who can save the bullpen arms and pre-back, like go back so we have a bullpen game the next day or have our full strength the next day. I feel like it's a luxury to try to force it to happen or to make guys go. The knee-jerk reaction is that it's not about health, that it's not going to be like, hey, we're going to hang this guy out to dry when he doesn't have his good stuff, or he's going to, if he comes out early, it's always going to have to be an injury or something like that. Or I don't know. It feels like you're forcing something that doesn't need to be there, and this might not be the best way to solution. I think just starting pitchers getting better and stretching them out and going to the worrying less about velo and maybe still a little bit more about pitching, I think is the answer forward instead of trying to create a rules. That's just mine.
Jason, you have a great point there. And I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying. The problem is to get to where you're talking about, stretching out starting pitchers and bringing the game back to that way it was before, you might have to legislate it because the teams are going to operate the way teams operate, trying to max out every night with their bullpens and best stuff available. And you're not going to have the starting pitcher emphasized under this current condition that the game is in. To get the game to that point, just as with the pitch clock, you had to have the pitch clock because the players just would not abide by what was trying to be enforced by the umpires. Well, you might need to put something in effect here to enhance the role of the starting pitcher. Now, again, as Jesse wrote, there would have to be qualifiers. You'd have to have, I don't know, 100 pitch limit. If a guy is struggling in the fourth inning, you'd have to get guys out of games if you needed to. It wouldn't be an absolute hard and fast, you have to pitch 6 innings. But at the same time, it's an idea worth exploring, as all of these different proposals are. And I know a lot of people, and Jason, maybe you're one of them, feel there's been too much change in the game and we should just calm down a little bit. And there's something to be said for that. I get that argument completely. I just, again, believe from an entertainment standpoint, not from a competitive standpoint, entertainment, drawing fans in, making your game more attractive, bringing back the Scherzers and the Verlanders and making those guys, well, getting more of them, that would be something in the game's interest.
Doesn't that diminish the role of the manager then real quick if they always have their best guys available and all this stuff? Like, because then you're losing the risk and the decision-making of the top managers where how can they juggle a bullpen? How can they – which guys to play on this day knowing they have this guy tomorrow? If you always have, like, your best guys going or something like that, it's – what's the point of a manager kind of?
Well, I would suggest that the role of the manager is already diminished.
I hear you.
The front office is calling a lot of the shots. So where we go, it doesn't matter.
Touche.
Yes,
all right, lastly, let's finish with this. You got Cardinals and Dodgers this weekend. You know, I know we addressed the Cardinals. You talked about them yesterday on Fair Territory, so maybe we can go on the Dodgers side. But go wherever you want to go if you have something to share with us. I mean, I think the main point here is you got to win the division first, or you would think. I don't think the Dodgers are going to be very pleased if they end up as a wild card, maybe even without home games if they fall out of that round.
I don't expect they would be pleased either, but considering their performance as a bye team the last couple of years, maybe that's the way to go.
Yeah.
So, again, they don't want to lose the division. They obviously want to win the division. It's down to 2 games. The Diamondbacks and Padres are red hot. Can they sustain this, both those teams, the rest of the season? That remains to be seen. And the Dodgers are getting healthier. They're in a situation where Muncy and Edman are going to come back with bets already there. So I expect they're going to play well down the stretch. Maybe not well enough, but we'll see. And what's interesting for the Dodgers is all that matters, and we've talked about this all season, guys, is October. And what is the best path for them in October? I would suggest it's not going through 4 rounds, it's going through 3, considering where their pitching has been all season long. But it's going to be a really interesting stretch drive. And the Dodgers bullpen, it's going to get better in the weeks ahead too. And Trinan comes back and Brazier comes back, but that's been a question. So it's kind of a fascinating thing right now to see where they are in comparison to those other two teams. And from the Cardinals' perspective, they're facing a tough part of their schedule now, obviously starting with the Dodgers, and they've got the Brewers and the Padres. This is make it or break it for them. And they cannot afford to dilly around anymore. They're under 500. They're the third worst run differential in the National League, which is astonishing to me. Worse run differential than the Nationals. And they're a team that has been an extreme disappointment. I don't expect things are going to change much for them in the weeks ahead. So they're going to face some really difficult questions at season's end if the season does not get any better for them. Because I looked this up the other day. This is amazing to think about. This would be, if this happens, the first time they've had back-to-back losing seasons in full campaigns, not strike interrupted or COVID interrupted or anything like that, since 1958-59. Haven't had back-to-back losing seasons in full seasons since then. That tells you about where they are.
That is incredible. Yeah, Cardinals fans should be like, wow. I mean, look at what we've done for a long time. You're spoiled. And on the Dodgers side, Ken, I just thought about when you said that, the NBA has had times in the last 2 decades where you buy a super team and then you win and you're a dynasty and all that, and you kind of know what's going to happen. MLB has super teams, and they have definitely a much lower percentage chance of winning a World Series, let alone putting 2 together.
Well, to revive an old argument, this is why when fans scream and yell about the Dodgers spending too much money or the Yankees spending too much money, I always think, no, it's fine. These teams aren't guaranteed to win. That's first of all. And the second part of that is when you have a Cleveland or a Milwaukee, to me, it is that much more satisfying when those other teams go down and you're there. So I'm not saying that's going to happen, and I'm not saying the sport is in a perfect economic situation where there's balance. No, there's not. We know there's not economic balance. There's too much disparity. I get it. But with where we are now, if I were a fan of one of those teams, one of the smaller market teams that's having such success, I'd be loving every second of it.
Yeah, the underdog story. It's so cool. The storylines are great. They're unique, and it's not predictable. So, Ken, enjoy the weekend. We'll watch you on Fox, Cardinals, and Dodgers on Saturday, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, FT Senior Insider Ken Rosenthal, hosting Fair Territory Mondays and Thursdays.
Hey, everybody. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content.
We're back here every weekday, all year long, so do not miss an episode.
The videos are coming in all day. Here's another video you might enjoy.
Baseball the way it should be covered.